What if I told you that everything you believed about the military power of the ancient world is untrue? We tend to think of great battles as chaotic clashes where brute force or numerical superiority prevailed. However, in the Nile Valley, thousands of years before the advent of modern academies, there was a training system that exceeded all expectation. Egyptian military leaders turned the training of recruits into an exact science, where every step and every movement was calculated down to the smallest detail. They didn't just teach people how to wield weapons, they completely rebuilt their minds and bodies. It was a machine that took an ordinary farmer and turned him into the perfect tool for defending the state. The conditions in which the training took place would break a modern person on the very first day. There was no room for pity, rest, or mistakes, because the price of failure was the life of an entire civilization. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn how the Egyptians used simple desert sand to create warriors who knew no fatigue. I will reveal the most closely guarded secret of the pharaohs, which has been lying on the surface for centuries. The path of an Egyptian soldier did not begin with the presentation of weapons. Young men were taken from their villages, torn from their families and familiar surroundings, and placed in a completely new environment. The first test was a close shave, which symbolized hygienic necessity and the loss of individuality. The barracks were long mud brick buildings with no room for personal space or privacy. Soldiers slept on hard mats spread out directly on the compacted earthen floor. Such harsh conditions were necessary to toughen the body and accustom it to campaign conditions. Morning roll call took place before sunrise, when the air was cool. The first hours of the day were devoted to monotonous physical exercises without weapons. Officers closely monitored that every movement was performed in sync by the entire squad. The basis of training was strict discipline, which was hammered into the heads of the recruits with methodical persistence. The slightest violation of order was followed by physical punishment, which was remembered for a long time. Recruits learned to understand commands not only by voice, but also by the sound of a trumpet or the movement of a standard. The recruits' food was meager and strictly regulated in order to accustom their stomachs to deprivation. The basis of their diet was coarse bread, dried fish, and a small amount of vegetables. Water was given out in portions to teach the fighters to endure thirst during long marches. It is interesting to see how this topic is perceived in different parts of the world, as training methods were similar in many ancient cultures. Where are you from? Do you agree with the arguments presented about losing individuality for the sake of a common goal? Are you ready to learn the truth about how the legendary endurance of the Egyptian infantry was created? Egyptian military leaders understood perfectly well that battles were often won before they even began during the march. The army's ability to quickly cover vast distances and immediately engage in combat was a key advantage. The skin on their feet became as hard as tanned hippopotamus leather, insensitive to hot stones and thorns. The pace of the run was set by the commander, and no one was allowed to fall behind. A soldier who fell had to get up and catch up with the formation, otherwise he would face severe punishment. In addition to simple running, forced marches were practiced with full gear and additional weight. Soldiers carried shields, weapons, water, and food supplies. Sometimes the weight of the equipment was deliberately increased by adding stones to the backpacks. This exercise simulated an infantry attack, when a solid wall of bodies rolled over the enemy. The feeling of unity and movement created a psychological effect of indestructible force. The sound of hundreds of feet striking the ground in unison frightened observers. However, simply running to the battlefield was not enough. One also had to be able to win in hand-to-hand combat. Physical strength without technique was useless against an experienced opponent. Therefore, the next stage of training was the art captured on the walls of ancient tombs. In the next chapter, you will learn what type of fighting the Egyptians considered to be the basis of close combat.
Hold the position. Do not yield.
What I am about to show you may seem like a modern Olympic discipline, but this art is thousands of years old. The walls of the tombs in Beni Hassan preserve incredibly detailed images of hundreds of wrestling techniques. This was not a sporting entertainment or leisure activity, but a deadly combat system. Egyptian wrestling was the foundation of hand-to-hand combat training, teaching soldiers to use their opponent's weight and strength against them. The frescoes depict techniques reminiscent of modern judo or freestyle wrestling. However, the context was completely different. It was training for killing, not for winning on points. Soldiers learned to use the momentum of an enemy running towards them to perform wide-ranging throws. If you like this description of this ancient combat system, don't forget to like this video. Your support helps us find even more unique facts about the ancient. Want to know a secret that will change your perception of the pharaoh's main striking force? The bow was not just a support weapon, but the main tool of the Egyptian army, a symbol of its power and technological superiority. Archery training began with learning the correct stance and grip, which differed from the European techniques we are familiar with. Recruits stood for hours in a tense position, holding heavy wooden blocks instead of bows. This strengthened their arms and taught them to freeze in place before shooting. Then they were given training bows with very tight strings, which had to be pulled hundreds of times a day. Their fingers became rough and calloused, turning into hard hooks. Instructors made sure that the elbow was raised to the correct height and the body remained stable. A mistaken technique could lead to injury or a broken bowstring. Shooting was carried out not only at stationary targets, but also at moving targets. Copper ingots or wooden shields set at various distances were used as targets. Piercing a copper ingot as thick as a finger was considered a sign of supreme skill. Archers learned to take into account the wind and the fall of the arrow at long distances. Their eye measurement skills were developed over years of constant practice under the scorching sun. Egyptian archers used a special method of drawing the bowstring, often bringing it behind the ear for maximum power. This allowed them to shoot arrows at tremendous speed, capable of piercing the light armor of the time. Rate of fire was also a critical factor in battle. Soldiers trained to draw arrows from their quivers and release them one after another in a smooth, steady. Particular attention was paid to weapon maintenance, as composite bows were sensitive to moisture and temperature changes. Soldiers learned to store their bows properly in cases, lubricate them with grease, and check the condition of the bow. The ability to repair weapons in the field was an essential skill. The arrows were made by craftsmen, but every soldier had to be able to feather the shaft or repair the tip. This instilled a careful attitude towards their main instrument. They learned to quickly change position, running from cover to cover without stopping fire. The mobility of the archer units was their main defense against enemy infantry. They always tried to keep their distance, inflicting damage from afar. But the pinnacle of Egyptian military art was the combination of the bow and speed. What happened when an archer was placed on a moving platform drawn by a pair of horses? In the next chapter, we will talk about the terror of the ancient battlefields. Chariots were the tanks of the Bronze Age, the most complex and expensive weapons of the era. Training a chariot crew required a completely different level of training and coordination. The crew consisted of two people, a driver and a fighter, who was most often an archer or spear thrower. Their interaction had to be telepathic, because words could not be heard in the roar of battle. The charioteer had to possess not only horse-driving skills, but also incredible physical strength and a sense of balance. The chariot had no springs, and every stone or bump was felt as a strong blow to the legs and spine. Staying on the small shaking platform at full speed was an art. Charioteers learned to maneuver, turn sharply, and stop the horses on command. They actually controlled the platform with their bodies, shifting their weight to compensate for centrifugal force. The chariot fighter, called a sineni, had to shoot accurately in conditions of wild shaking. This required incredible stabilization of the torso and legs. They learned to spring their knees, dampening the vibration so that their hands with the bow remained stationary relative to the target. They shot in all directions, forward, sideways, and even backward when retreating. To do this, the warriors tied the reins to the charioteer's belt so they could use both hands. Maintaining the chariot was a complex technical task that the warriors themselves performed. They had to know how to lubricate the axles with animal fat, how to check the tension of the leather wheel bindings, and how to repair breakdowns. The lightness and strength of the structure were the key to survival. The chariot was assembled from different types of wood, bent with steam, and required constant attention. Any crack in a spoke or drawbar could cost the crew their... Horses were trained to respond to the slightest movement of the reins and voice. It was a job that never stopped, even during rest periods. Animals were a precious resource, and their loss was considered a disaster. The chariot tactic consisted of quick raids, firing at the enemy, and immediate retreat. They circled around the enemy formation like hornets, not giving the enemy time to recover. The crews practiced these maneuvers at training grounds until they became automatic, learning not to collide with each other. The synchronized turn of dozens of chariots was a breathtaking sight. It required the strictest discipline and spatial thinking. Guess what happened next? When the arrows ran out and the distance was reduced to hand-to-hand combat. That's when the heavy infantry, armed with axes and unique Hopsh swords, came into play. The Hopsh, with its curved, sickle-shaped blade, was a fearsome weapon designed not for stabbing, but for slashing and cutting attacks. Training in the use of the Hopsh required an understanding of the complex trajectory of the strike. Soldiers learned to swing the blade in a wide arc to utilize the momentum of the heavy bronze blade. The Hopsh's special feature was its ability to hook the edge of an enemy's shield and pull it down. This exposed the opponent's neck and head for a deadly blow. During training, soldiers practiced this movement for hours. Hook, jerk, strike. Wooden training models were smashed to splinters by the force of these blows. Instructors demanded that soldiers put their entire body weight into the swing, making the blow devastating. Battle axes were simpler but no less effective weapons, capable of breaking through shields and helmets. Training with the axe was rough and straightforward. The blow had to be powerful enough to crush bones even through protection. Soldiers trained by striking vertical posts, developing accuracy and strength in their wrists. The axe did not get stuck in the shield thanks to its narrow blade, which allowed for quick repeated strikes. It was a weapon for breaking through dense formations. The shield was not just a means of defense, but also an active striking tool in the hands of an experienced warrior. Egyptian shields made of wood and covered with skin had a rounded top. Soldiers learned to strike the edge of the shield against the enemy's face or throat, stunning them before striking with a blade. The ability to maintain a shield formation, creating a solid wall, was the basis for the unit's survival. Shoulder thrusts against the shield were practiced by the entire line at the same time. The Hopsh was often paired with a dagger for use in close combat. Soldiers learned to quickly grab it with their left hand if their main weapon was lost. Dagger fighting was dirty and fast, aimed at defeating vital organs. Strikes from below under the ribs and at the joints of armor were practiced. There was no place for honor here, only efficiency. The basis of the diet was bread and beer, nutritious and high-calorie food available in large quantities. Beer in ancient Egypt was thick, similar to porridge, and contained little alcohol but a lot of energy. Soldiers learned to bake bread in field conditions using simple stone ovens. Fresh bread was the key to the health and morale of the troops. The diet also included onions and garlic, which were considered remedies for disease. Water was the most valuable resource on a march through the desert lands surrounding the Nile Valley. Soldiers learned to conserve every drop, carrying water in leather wineskins or clay vessels. Water consumption was strictly regulated. Drinking was only allowed on... The ability to find a water source or dig a well in a dry riverbed was part of the training. Officers knew the locations of all the oases and wells along the route. Setting up camp for the night became a well-rehearsed ritual where everyone knew their place. In a matter of hours, a city of tents surrounded by a moat and a palisade of shields sprang up in the empty desert. Soldiers dug the ground, set up fences, and lit fires. The speed with which the camp was set up guaranteed safety from sudden night attacks. In the morning, the camp disappeared just as quickly, leaving no traces except for the ashes of the fires.
But I am grateful. We march tomorrow.
War in the ancient world was not only about battles in open fields, but also about capturing fortified cities. The Egyptian army was a master of siege warfare, and training in storming walls was extremely intensive. Soldiers trained to use long assault ladders, which had to be quickly brought up to the wall and set up. This required coordinated teamwork. Some carried the ladders, while others shielded them from stones thrown from above. Climbing the rickety ladder under imaginary fire was a test of nerves. Using a battering ram to break down a gate required brute physical strength and coordination. A group of soldiers swung a heavy log, protected by a canopy of skins, striking it rhythmically. They had to keep the rhythm despite fatigue and noise. Engineers taught soldiers to find weak spots in the masonry of walls and gates. Breaking through was the #1 task for assault troops. Tunneling and sapper work were another way to overcome enemy defenses. Soldiers learned to dig tunnels under the walls, reinforcing them with wooden supports. It was dangerous and hard work in the dark and cramped conditions, where there was always a risk of collapse. Diggers were no less important than archers or charioteers. Their labor often decided the outcome of a siege lasting many months. Defending their own fortifications was also part of the training program. Soldiers learned to throw stones and pour hot liquids on attackers. They practiced counterattack tactics from the gates to repel the enemy from the walls. Understanding how the besieger thinks helped them defend themselves. Training included building temporary fortifications and siege towers out of wooden reeds. The ability to quickly erect a defensive embankment or palisade was vital during a siege. Carpentry skills were valued as much as combat skills. Soldiers knew how to tie knots and work. Psychological resilience during an assault was critical, as losses during wall attacks were always high. Soldiers had to overcome their fear and climb up, seeing their comrades fall. Officers led the way, setting an example of courage. The cries and noise of an assault were deliberately imitated during training. The use of fire during a siege required caution and skill. Archers were trained to shoot flaming arrows to set fire to buildings inside the city. Special units were responsible for setting fire to gates and wooden fortifications. Order and discipline were what distinguished the Egyptian army from the barbarian hordes. Training and marching took hundreds of hours, transforming a motley crowd into a unified monolith. Soldiers learned to hold their line and align themselves in rows and columns. Everyone knew their place relative to the unit standard. Losing formation in battle was considered a disgrace and a crime. Maneuvering on the battlefield required quick reactions to the signals of trumpets and drums. The army could turn around to face the enemy, form a square, or regroup into a column for attack. These complex maneuvers were practiced until they became automatic on the parade ground. Commanders controlled thousands of men like pieces on a Senate board. The precision of the maneuver often saved them from closing ranks when attacked by the enemy was a key moment in infantry combat. Soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder, covering each other with their shields. The rear ranks pressed against the front, creating a powerful momentum. It was extremely difficult to withstand such pressure. The feeling of solidarity gave confidence in victory. The wall of shields formation was used to protect against archer fire. Soldiers crouched down, covering themselves with shields from the front and above, turning into an armored turtle. They could stand like this for hours, waiting for the enemy to run out of arrows. Patience and endurance were the main weapons in such moments. Different types of formations were designed for different types of terrain and opponents. In the desert, the formation was more sparse, so as not to raise dust and suffer from the heat. In narrow valleys, deep columns were used for breakthroughs. Flexibility in tactics was a strong point of Egyptian commanders. Training included the interaction of different branches of the army: infantry, archers, and chariots. The infantry knew when to step aside to let their chariots pass and when to close ranks. Archers shot from behind the infantry without hitting their own men. This complex choreography of death required constant rehearsals. The Magi, elite scouts and desert guards recruited from Nubian tribes, occupied a special place in the Egyptian military system. Their training was radically different from that of the regular infantry, emphasizing individual skill and survival. The Magi were trackers, able to read history from a broken branch or an overturned stone. They learned to see the invisible and hear the inaudible. The desert was their home, not a hostile environment. Their training included the art of camouflage, allowing them to blend into the landscape. A Makai could lie motionless for hours, covered in sand, waiting for an enemy patrol. They used natural cover so skillfully that they were only noticed when it was too late. Surprise was their main weapon. The strike was swift and silent. The Magi were masters of the bow, but they were also skilled in close combat with clubs and knives. Their fighting style was wild and unpredictable, devoid of military rigidity. They attacked like predators and disappeared before the enemy had time to organize a defense. Their mobility allowed them to control vast territories. Their survival skills included finding water in the driest places and knowing which plants were edible. The Magi could get by on minimal food and water, making long raids deep into enemy territory. They were the pharaoh's eyes and ears on the borders. No one knew the desert better than they did. The Makai also served as military police, maintaining order in the necropolises and at the borders. They were feared and respected for their incorruptibility and ferocity. Their training included methods of interrogation and escorting prisoners. They were the guardians of order in a world of chaos. Interaction with dogs was a unique feature of the Magi. They used specially trained dogs to search for and pursue intruders. Man and dog worked as a single team, understanding each other without words. Night operations were their specialty. The Magi were excellent at navigating by the stars and could see better than others in the dark. Night was their ally, concealing their movements. Enemies feared the shadows of the night, knowing that these warriors could be hiding there. The history of the training of Egyptian soldiers opens our eyes to the price at which the great civilizations of the past were created. These were not accidental victories, but the result of tremendous labor, the harshest discipline, and a deep understanding of human nature. The pharaohs turned warfare into a science and soldier training into an art, where every element, from a piece of bread to the bend of a bow, mattered. They proved that order and organization always triumph over chaos and brute force. When we look at the majestic pyramids and temples, we must not forget that they were protected by the shields and bodies of these nameless warriors. Their sweat and blood were absorbed into the sand on which modern history stands. The lessons of their fortitude and endurance are still relevant today, reminding us of the boundless possibilities of the human spirit. What other aspects of the lives of ancient warriors would you like to learn about in our next issues? Perhaps you are interested in battlefield medicine or the details of naval battles? Write your suggestions in the comments and be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on new dives into history.